Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Maricella, are you sitting on your couch?
Yeah, I have a tiny apartment. If I'm not on my couch, I really honestly have nowhere else to be.
Well, we recently heard a great review from one of our listeners that said we sound like we're best friends sitting on a couch, chatting and hanging out or something like that. And it resonated. I was so happy that our friendship really shines through the audio recordings of a podcast. That
really
meant something to me. And that was, I'm not sitting on my couch. I'm hiding in my bedroom from my children, but we can pretend we're nice and comfy. We're not in a closet, which we've also been in before. So
yeah, that's true. It's been a while since the closet. Not enough. The air. Well, I don't know. My apartment could easily be turned into a walk-in closet if I had to. It's tiny, but yeah, I'm on my couch, and yes, that review was really nice to see. I love that we can do this and get to share with people some of the great stories from amazing women and men and get to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much to our listeners for being such a huge part of our community, of helping to inspire us and drive us every week to produce the Ellevate podcast. It's always been our mission to amplify the stories of women and not just those that have made it or have a platform, but to really talk about real women experiences, identities, challenges, opportunities, you name it. Being human is so real, it's so raw, it's so complicated and convoluted. And it's, being able to get these stories out there that we hope we can inspire you, we can give you hope, we can spur you to action. Never more has that been important than during this time as we headed into the COVID-19 quarantine. We really wanted to provide you with stories of women who were, talking about mental health or fitness or healthcare, a lot of these things that were important. And now, given the current climate around racism, specifically against the Black community, we want to use this as a platform to, again, have these conversations, to amplify these voices, and to bring our community along on this journey where we can do more, we can learn more, we can take action, and we can be inspired. And I just have been so honored to do that with you, Maricella, these past couple of years, and specifically these past couple months, where we haven't been together in person, but I've never felt so connected to you. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. I feel the same way. It's powerful how, without even being face to face with people, you can maintain that connection and build a bond and build bonds that are stronger. And I think that the stories and the highlighting of these amazing women makes that so true for our full community and for everyone. Like, we don't need to be in the same room. We don't need to be even know each other in person. I mean, you and I do, duh, but everyone else, and it's still powerful, and you can still connect, and you can still make a difference together.
All about community. Well, and our guest today is Meena Harris. She is inspiring on so many levels. Particularly, she's just someone who takes action. That was a comment I made to her during our conversation. Is, she has an idea and she just goes for it. She doesn't let things stand in her way. She's the founder and CEO of Phenomenal, and she's also recently come out with a children's book, Kamala and Maya's Big Idea. And I am so excited for this book, particularly given I have 3 little kids. But we've been talking a lot about representation in children's stories and what they see in their schools and the conversations they're having. And it's so important that we have these diverse identities and voices not just for diverse communities, but for all communities. We need to really disrupt so much about what children are seeing, what they're learning. And it was phenomenal to hear Meena's story and what's inspired her to do this.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your conversation. It's great to have people with big ideas and with the, I want to say guts, but really with that impetus to take action and do things and make change. And it's very inspiring to see that.
Did you have, Maricella, growing up, did you have a lot of books that had characters that you connected with, that you identified with?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. I think you and I have talked about the fact that we are both huge fans of Nancy Drew. Yeah. So I grew up reading those books. I remember when I was a kid, every time my dad would travel for work, I would ask him to get, that was the one thing I would ask him to get me, a Nancy Drew book, because I couldn't find them in El Salvador. Guess that would be the closest thing, which is not even right.
No, and that's why I'm asking. I mean, you grew up in El Salvador, and you would, I grew up in the United States, and so much, and Meena talks about this, like so much of the characters in children's books are animals or, white boys, basically. And I just, growing up in El Salvador, was that different, or was it still so influenced by the biases in our society that you didn't, I know El Salvador has a history of, sexism and equality, lack of equality in many ways. And so I was just curious to hear what your experiences were.
Yeah. Well, clearly I was stumped by that question because I hadn't even thought about it, but no, I didn't have any role models in books or media. And El Salvador is very Americanized in many ways, in the sense that that's what we consume is what's here. And if you add to that the layer of very Latin American patriarchy and machismo, it's what we get from here, but even worse. Wow.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing that Meena is changing that. So let's get to my conversation with her. And I hope all of you are inspired to change the world as well. Meena, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start the conversation with a little context to find out more about who you are and how you got to where you are today. Would you mind sharing your story?
Oh my gosh, yeah, my story. I feel like I don't know, a long story. Where do I start? I am a Bay Area native, born and raised in Oakland, California, very proud Oakland native. I left the Bay Area for the first time to go to law school. So I went to Harvard Law, and then after that, I took a very traditional path in clerking and going to a corporate law firm for a number of years. And then after I did that, I came back to the Bay Area to go back into tech. I've sort of been in and out of tech for much of my career. I guess I'm not going in order here, but right after college, I worked for Facebook. So I was there very early on and had an incredible sort of, front row seat to this new fangled technology and new social networking startup that, a lot of people didn't even know about when we first started. And came back. So after I went off to law school, I came back to tech and went to another tech company doing policy. So I was sort of slowly backing away from the law. I knew that that was not something that I wanted to do forever. And let's see, then the election happened in 2016, and I launched a women's brand called Phenomenal. It's now called Phenomenal. People also know it as the Phenomenal Woman Action Campaign. And it was sort of the first time that I really, I think, embraced and leaned into my identity as an entrepreneur and as a creator. And it's been an incredible journey, and one that I frankly never expected, in that the original campaign was just supposed to be a 1-month fundraising campaign for women's organizations coming out of the 2016 election. I think, like a lot of people, I came out of that, really feeling a sense of responsibility of, how can I be more impactful in my community, and speak up and do more. And for me, it was a very small idea. It was, I was inspired by the poem Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. And I put that on some t-shirts and thought maybe, people will buy them and we can raise money for women's organizations. And it totally unexpectedly took off. And now it's been 3.5 years, and I'm still here working on it. I'm still in tech, and so I'm very much juggling the sort of lifestyle of the nights and weekends entrepreneur. And yeah, that's where I am now. So I'm sort of, I sit at, I would say, the intersection of tech, politics, and sort of pop culture and media, which is what we're doing with Phenomenal.
Well, and the time is now. I mean, we've seen over the past couple of years, particularly the intersection between those seemingly disparate areas between media, technology, policy, and politics. And I know that is something that runs deep within your family: advocacy, activism, creating change. Your mom, Maya Harris, is a civil rights lawyer and senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. And then your aunt is Senator Kamala Harris.
That is true.
So you kind of grew up with that spirit in your veins.
Totally.
Growing up, are there any childhood memories that stand out?
So many. One in particular that it kind of actually came to be this memory a few years ago, and I just cherish it. And I think it's such a great example of what you just talked about, and in particular, sort of everyday acts of activism. And that's really the message of Phenomenal, that each of us has a role to play, no matter how small. And so that memory is going to the grocery store with my grandma, and my beloved grandma. She was such a huge figure in my life and was really a second mother to me, and obviously a huge figure for my mom and aunt. And I think she did a pretty good job of raising them. So we were at the grocery store, and she was telling me that we couldn't buy grapes. And it must have been like 1988. So I was, like barely 4 years old. And it was the first time that I learned a very important word, which is boycott. And it's, it was when Cesar Chavez was fasting to call attention to the plight of farm workers and their families. And my grandmother was teaching me that, it was activism in the grocery store, right? That we were not buying grapes because we were standing in solidarity with Cesar Chavez and the work that he was doing. And what I love about that story in particular is that, my grandmother was just an ordinary, regular person going about her life, taking her granddaughter with her to, to go grocery shopping. She wasn't an elected official. She wasn't someone who had any sort of, celebrity about her, or was even sort of a figure in our community, and sort of that, traditional sense of being an elected official. But she woke up every day with a real sense of purpose, and not only that, responsibility, which is what she instilled within all of us in terms of our values, that you have to do good in the world no matter where you are. And for her, as a breast cancer researcher and scientist, that meant she was really dedicated to, for example, mentoring students of color that were coming through her lab at UC Berkeley. It meant that she had dedicated herself to creating support spaces for Black women who were suffering from or had survived breast cancer. And it's something that it was a real refrain, in our household, which was that, do your part, right? And you have a duty to do that. And no matter how small, each of us has an opportunity to make a contribution and to make an impact and to do good in the world.
I love that story. I think about this all the time. I'm a mom of 3, and I know you have some children yourself, and you realize, especially I don't know, I mean, especially raising my kids in light of where we are in this world, and how
right, yeah.
I don't know how to best to say it. I mean, it's like, I don't want to shelter them. I want them to understand, the privilege that they have. I want them to understand what's happening outside of our home and our city, and to know that they can take a step, however small it may seem, to help other people or to live with their values. And it's something as a parent I've had to figure out, how to show up in that way for myself and for my family. But, what are some of the things that you're doing with your own family now?
Yeah, I mean, I think first that's just to respond to what you just said as being a parent and really having to think about that, right? And I think it is something that you do have to commit to, right? Like, I think we're all super busy, working moms, not working moms, like everybody is busy and going about their everyday lives. And you really have to decide, like, okay, I'm going to commit to this, whatever that may be. And I like how you said, you don't want to shelter your children. I mean, the way that I've phrased it, and I don't know if this is exactly right, but that I talk to my kids, frankly, like they're adults, right? I mean, I put it in terms that they can understand, but I talk to them about, what's going on in the world. There's a kind of funny story. This happened, I guess now about 2 years ago. It was my older daughter was much, much younger. I think she was not even 2 yet. And we get the New Yorker at home, and there's often cartoons on the cover, and often there are cartoons of Donald Trump on the cover. And it happened to be, sitting in the living room, and she said, "Who is that?" And I said, "It's Donald Trump." And Nick, my partner, sort of came running in like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And like, "Are we really going to do this?" And I'm like, "Yes, we are going to do this. I'm going to talk to, whatever, my 18-month-old about Donald Trump." And of course I wasn't like explaining, kind of complex, things about the election or governance, but I used him as an example to, talk about the fact that he's the president, and what kind of good leadership looks like and bad leadership. And that, I the way I was phrasing it at that time, we were having lots of conversations around good behavior and bad behavior, and that he doesn't, have good behavior. So, just finding things that are around you to translate them into terms that, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or however your kids old are, to be able to actually engage with these issues. Who is it? I think Lauren Underwood. I had interviewed her a couple years ago for Lenny Letter. And something she said that really stuck with me was, and she's a congresswoman now, right? Was that she wasn't raised in sort of a politically active household, but her parents always talked to her about the news and like just what was going on in the world, right? And so at the dinner table, they were engaging with, whatever election was happening or what was going on in their community. And I say that to say that, like, that's such a small thing, right? Like, just to talk about what happened in the world that day at your dinner table, but it really matters. And it encourages, I think, children especially to think about what's going on outside of their individual immediate experience, what's happening to other people, right? This is about really basic building blocks around empathy and kindness and caring. So I think that's the easiest thing that you can do, right? Is just talk to your kids about this stuff. Especially, you asked what we're doing now. I mean, with coronavirus, right? My kids only have so much understanding of what that means, but they are aware that that is happening, and why we are at home, and that there are lots of people who are suffering right now, right? It's an opportunity to talk to them about the fact that there are people who are going hungry, and how fortunate we are, and how we can be doing more for other people. Another example, through my book, we released my book, which I hope we'll talk about, but we released activity pages, right, for kids to come up with the tools to go after their big ideas. But a part of it is, who do you need help from, and writing letters to people to ask for help. And one of them is writing thank you letters, and there's templates for thank you letters for frontline workers, and it's like, it's a fill in the blank sort of thing. So the point is, that's such a small thing, but if you decide that you're going to commit to it, and have those conversations, find those small things where you can turn the conversations into actual activities and action. I think, again, it takes work, and something that my mom also talks a lot about as I was growing up, and now, is that you need to have the conversations, but you also need to follow up with that in demonstrating it, the work through action. And that's another, greater responsibility, but there are tons of small ways in which we can be doing that for our kids, including the example I gave with, my grandmother explaining to me why we're not buying grapes in the grocery store. And that literally has stuck with me my whole life. Right.
Well, so tell me more about your book. It just came out June 2nd, and it sounds like this is something that I'm going to need for my children and for our conversations. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's about two sisters named Kamala and Maya. It's based on a true story from the childhood of my mom, Maya, and Aunt Kamala. And it's very much about everything we've been talking about. It's about two little girls who see an opportunity, a problem, an issue in their community, and they come up with a big idea and figure out how to change it and to create positive change in their community. And what I love about the story is that it's literally in the backyard of their apartment complex, right? They're not like running for office or doing some kind of grand big thing. To be clear, I think those things are important, but like the book is about something very simple, and they make a huge impact by leaning on their community, by bringing their community together and creating, strength in numbers and power in community to better their community. And it's about, persevering in the face of no, adults telling them that they are too young or, too small, that it can't be done, that it's too expensive, and they figure it out. They figure out, what they need to get it done. And so it's very much, I think, sort of early lessons in, community organizing and basic problem solving. What I'm most proud of is that it's these two powerful, strong girls who are the leaders, right? Somebody phrased it like they're the bosses. They're the ones that are orchestrating this whole thing. I mean, it's about leadership, but it's also about community, right? And being able to make change through your community and bring your community together. But it also is a message around listening to girls and seeing them as, fully fledged people with interesting big ideas that are worth supporting. So I'm really excited about it. It's super personal in that it, came from my family and a family story. And I originally wanted to write it to sort of memorialize that as I was becoming a new parent and thinking about everything we've been talking about. It was a reminder to myself, how do I, show up with that intention with my kids, and frankly, sort of like emulate what my grandmother did, what my mom did in my own way. And so this book is a really, kind of small part of that process.
And, I think based on something you said earlier, we're probably around the same age. And I was having a conversation with someone recently about books that inspired me when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so few, it was always princesses and, or topics that sort of, for lack of a better word, kind of dumbed down being a young girl, made it all about, boys and silliness. And so I always loved reading Nancy Drew because she solved problems, she took ownership, she took action, but there was just so few opportunities to be inspired, to read stories that have diverse representation, that are more action oriented, that show young girls in strong, positive light. And I'm just cannot wait to read this book. But what was that experience like for you in terms of really helping to further the representation in children's literature, helping to create diverse stories and narratives that really have been lacking for way too long?
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying, you mentioned your son, that I think this is really important, not only for girls and girls of color, but also boys and sons and white children, right? Like this is something that we all need to see. And we know that a lot of these, cultural norms and social norms around how we view and treat women, that stuff starts super early. And for boys to engage with literature, where they're seeing strong, powerful girl leaders just existing, right? It's not called the Strong, Powerful Girl Leadership book, right? They're just existing in the world. Like that is super important for boys to see. And we know that when we raise boys who respect girls, they turn into men who respect women. It's all connected. So yeah, back to your question about sort of my place in furthering and doing my part in helping to create more diverse children's literature. It's interesting in that the way that I wrote this book was very much the way that I started Phenomenal, which was I was like responding in a moment, right? I kind of never thought I would be a kids author. I never sought out to like do change, children's literature around diversity, or be a part of that change. And instead, it was that I was a new mom and I was reading books with my now older daughter and, reading the classics, Goodnight Moon and, Brown Bear, all of those great books. But at a certain point found myself like, where are the girls and where's the brown skin? And, there's not characters that look like my daughter and are not relatable for her and are just sort of, regular, relatable, developed, fictional characters. And we were starting to like color the skin brown with markers or, change the pronouns from he to she to they. And I finally thought, well, what if I wrote my own book, right? And what if I actually created something that is what I want to see for my kids? And that's what was sort of one of the, I think, starting points for me is, what that would look like. And it intersected with, as I already talked about, this whole family story of not only hearing these stories of my mom and aunt growing up, but again, the lessons around all of us doing our part and all of us have a role to play and thinking about how I pass that on to my own daughters. So that all kind of, came together. And I now am very proud to be a part of sort of this new, era of much more diversity in kids' books. We've seen a ton of progress. I think we still have a lot more work to do. There's a statistic that in 2018, there were as many books with animals as main characters as there were with Black, Latinx, Native, and Asian characters combined, which is pretty stunning. And if you look at the diversity also of authors and illustrators, it's sort of just as bad. So I'm really proud of that. And I sort of look at myself as standing on the shoulders too of incredible folks that have put out all this feminist literature that sort of came, I think, in the last 5 years, that I was also reading to my girls and lucky to have that, like Rebel Girls and Rad Women from A to Z and things like that. But again, I found myself thinking like, I'm tired of reading lists of women, right? And sort of historical characters. I think it's really important to teach that history, but like, can we just get regular girl characters that are just in the world existing just like my daughters are, and so that's really what inspired it. And it's been amazing to just see people loving it and engaging with it. And, I've received really interesting messages from friends and others. And one in particular that stuck with me was a mom who has a son who's half Chinese. And she said, thanks for putting this out there. That's just sort of like regular kids living their lives. I would love to find more books that have, Asian main characters that are not like about Chinese New Year, right? That are just them existing in the world. And if, historically the default has been white boys and a dog, as Marley Diaz, the young education and book activist, has put it. And in the same way, I think that, we need to change that default so that it is diverse characters and that they are the main characters, not just the, supporting characters. That's another thing that I think we've been seeing, which is great progress, which is if you have a cast of characters, they're much more diverse, right? I think you're less likely to find like all white children in a book, although by the way, that does definitely still exist. But they're not the main hero. They're not the like main protagonist. So I'm super proud to, do my part. I had a big idea and I went for it. And I frankly did not know what was going to come of it. It wasn't something that I sort of had on my roadmap. But it's been incredibly gratifying. And the process of, meeting other authors and, just putting something that is so personal and special to you out into the world and seeing people hold it and engage with it and, love it is just such an incredible feeling.
Yes to all of that. And absolutely yes to, boys should be reading books that aren't just about boys. And I do think we default to it, which I want to call this out again, because I think it's incredibly important. We as parents default to, reading our children books that reflect our children. And that's living in a bubble. I mean, that's living in a silo. That's the problem with, communities and how it becomes so homogeneous, and lack
Exactly.
of really being intentional about exposing our children from young ages to different identities, and we have to do that and hold ourselves accountable for that. And I just really appreciate you um, talking about that here, because it's top of mind for me always, and I hope for our listeners as well. So tell me, I'm struck during this conversation with this sense of action, and you talked about being able to talk about issues and taking action. You saw a need for diverse representation in children's leadership. You took action after the 2016 election. You took action and started Phenomenal Woman. I'm incredibly inspired by that. I think it's something I aspire to be, is more action oriented. But I want to get back to Phenomenal Woman, because you've done a lot of really important campaigns. You've done a lot of really important work to have an impact on the world and on what's happening in our world. And would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I did. I mean, that's just sort of my orientation, and part of it goes exactly back to this whole conversation and how I was raised. My Kamala talks about this all the time, which is that when she was growing up and would come home complaining about something, or worrying about something, my grandmother's response was, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? Like, don't complain, like, go figure out what you're going to do about it. And there's so much power in that, and that it's also telling this young child that, like, you can do something about it, right? And you should do something about it. So I think I was very much raised with that value that we can all do something. So yeah, Phenomenal was exactly that, and it was something, as I said, that originally was a very small, modest idea to raise money for women's organizations, but has now turned into something much bigger. It didn't happen by magic. It definitely is something that I continue to think about. How can we keep this going? How can we grow it? And in particular, use the platform to raise awareness around issues that affect underrepresented communities, and issues that don't often sort of reach mainstream audiences, and to do it in a way that is educational, that is accessible, that is a space where people feel able to engage. I think that a lot of these issues can be really complex. They can be really sort of hard to engage with, in terms of they're just tough issues, right? Like, one of them is one of the campaigns we've done is around family separation. Children getting ripped from their mother's arms. How do you create sort of a campaign that raises awareness around that, helps people to give them some of the tools to talk about these issues, to engage with them, but then also to do it in a positive way that lifts up that affected community, that impacted community. And so we did that through the message of Phenomenal Mother, which was to celebrate not only mothers who were coming here to the United States to create a better life for their families, but also all of the mothers across the United States who were stepping up and saying, I'm not going to sit by and let this happen on my watch. Like, I'm going to do something about this, right? So that's really the sentiment, I think, for all of our campaigns, which is raising awareness around these serious, sometimes tough, complex issues, but doing it in a way that brings positivity and celebration.
You're doing really important work, not just through Kamala and Maya's Big Idea, your book coming out, or your book that's just recently been released, not just through Phenomenal, but just through your advocacy and your voice, which is so incredibly important during this time. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, as we head into November and head into November and an election period when the world is so upside down in many ways, and on the tails of what happened 4 years ago. What can our listeners do to be engaged in this, to be engaged in supporting women running for office, to use their voice as well, to be advocates just as you are?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, I have to say this, even though I hope it's the obvious thing, is vote. You have to, that is one of the most critical ways that you can use your voice, and for your voice to be heard. and making sure that everyone in your circle is voting and they understand that there are people who are actively trying to suppress votes. I mean, it's really bad stuff. And I think, beyond that, we are also in unprecedented times and, living through a pandemic, and we don't know what that's going to look like in November for voting. So, making a plan and committing to it and figuring out, how you're going to make that happen. I think the other, thing is really looking at your local politics and your local community. I think that's another sort of silver lining of the pandemic, that we're not only seeing these incredible, acts of humanity and goodness, but people are also, engaging and supporting their local food banks, right? They're following, what their mayors are doing, what their local elected city council members and others are doing to support their communities in a time of crisis. And I always, I think that presidential campaigns in particular are some of the, best ways that we can all, do something. There's literally, tons of opportunities, whether it's from, fundraising to knocking on, I guess we're not knocking on doors now, but, making phone calls, right? Like those are easy ways to engage that you can actually, do from your living room. But it's also just an incredible time to be able to talk to your neighbors and to engage in meaningful conversations with folks around you in terms of what they care about and what's motivating them or not motivating them, right? To engage with this election. And then, as I said, I think the other piece of it is really turning local, and that's where this stuff really happens and makes an impact on local communities. And so I think for people who are really wanting to feel like they're, making a difference, so to speak, there's no better place to start than, your neighborhood, your community, your own backyard. And I would encourage people, again, if you have any time or means, especially right now, to think about that. People are going hungry. People have, lots of people have lost their jobs, right? There's just so much suffering right now. And I think that the more we talk about that and acknowledge that, I hope that leads to better policies that will support, families and workers. But there's just so much, and I think it goes back to picking one thing or one or two things and really committing to that and sticking to that. And so I think I'm also making the point that if you're wanting to get, more engaged right now and with the election, it doesn't have to necessarily be something that is directly, political, but still has important outcomes, I think, in terms of the political process.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Meena, for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. I'm going to end with just a few quick questions, a lightning round, if you will. You just answer with one sentence or less. Introvert or extrovert?
Oh my God. This one, you said one sentence or less, and I'm so long-winded, but this one's a hard one. Everybody thinks I'm an extrovert, but I'm kind of secretly an introvert.
I totally get it. Favorite day of the week?
Oh, Saturday.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Oh man, that's a hard one as a parent. I'm a night owl, but I don't really have a choice. So I don't always get to be a night owl anymore.
Who's your dream dinner guest?
Oh man. Prince.
Oh, excellent. What's your pet peeve?
Meetings and phone calls that could have been emails.
Zooms. Your favorite recent read?
Michelle Obama's Becoming.
Your top self-care practice?
I'm not so great at self-care. I'm drinking lots of water. I've gotten a lot better at doing my Peloton regularly, so I'm going to go with that.
Excellent. And where can we find your book?
www.phenomenalgirl.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Meena, for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was just a inspirational, phenomenal conversation.
Thank you.
I loved getting to hear your story.
Super fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.